Today we're going to have a look at Visual Studio 2015 with CVS Suite 2009 Release 2. Now, we're going to show you everything from the beginning through to the end here. Get the software from our website. There's a little trial download link on most of the pages of the website that you can see there. And we're going to take you all through using the software in lots of different ways. Now, I've already downloaded a copy here to my C drive, my downloads folder here, so let's just open that up. It's just a click-through type installer. We click through. I'm going to install both the server and the client on one machine. I'm going to go in and change those custom options to install the RCS wrappers, and if I wanted to, I could also enable the WinMerge right-click menu. Just for ease of use of showing everything here, I'm installing both the server and the client on one PC. Most of you will have a separate server to a client, and that server can of course be used by multiple teams. Once this software is all installed, we are going to be prompted to reboot. That won't take us very long there. There are a few little reboot cycles that are going to go on here that just make sure that the software is going to behave itself. A wizard will come up after that reboot, and you can specify the name of your repository, and I'm going to click here that I want to use a reserved mode type configuration. That's like Visual SourceSafe. You might want that, or you might not. If you're already familiar with CVS, you might want the concurrent mode. But just for this example, I'm going to be showing you the reserved mode, which is a bit more like what most Visual Studio users will be used to. So the wizard is all automatically run there, and I'm going to reboot again. One of the things that that wizard does is to set some environment variables. Those won't really take effect until after that reboot. Now that we've rebooted, I just want to create a couple of shortcuts here because we don't have the standard sort of start menu that we did in Windows 7. So we'll just pin these things to the taskbar that we're going to use quite often. And we've got them down there. The control panel, you have to go into the control panels to be able to find that. Now the control panel is where we configure the server. So if we want to set some advanced settings here, which we do. You don't have to do these advanced settings, but these are some advanced features that you might be wanting to use. We click that little change settings button. We get the UAC authorization. We go to the advanced tab, and I'm going to enable convert comments to bug numbers. And you can make that required if you want, so that you always have a user-defined change set on every commit, on every change. I'm also just going to enable that option about do not resolve client names, just because this is a standalone machine, the DNS isn't set up. So now we're going to enable auditing. So this tracks all of your changes to an SQL database, as well as your usual CVS repository. So it's a fail-safe, if you like. The database would normally have quite restricted access, be kind of write-only, rows can't be deleted. I'm just checking the connection status. I create the tables and then check the connection status again to make sure that those tables are being created all right. I say what I want to record in my audit database, and I'm done. Now I'm going to enable the defect tracking integration. I'm going to use Bugzilla here. However, I'm actually using Bugzilla version 4, which is a little bit old now, but that's what I'm using. You can also use Jira, and you can also use Mantis. If you need something else, give our pre-sales technical support team a call. So we just go through and fill out the fields. What I'm going to automatically attach to the bug, the diff file, and I'm also going to recognize certain commands in the comments so that I can change the status of the bug. There's lots of options that I can fiddle around with there, but let's not get too complicated right now. I stop the server and I start the server again. I'm going to do this a few different ways so that you can see how we can start and stop that server. That just makes sure that the server service will pick up all of those changes that I've just made. Now, a little bit more command line stuff here, just for that MySQL database that I'm using for the auditing. I want to create another user on that can read but can't make changes to the audit database. That will allow us to do a little bit reporting at the very end of this demo using Microsoft Excel and some SQL. Now, of course, I'm using MySQL here. We also support SQLite, and we also support SQL Server, and we also support Oracle. If you need a particular database for your auditing, just contact our pre-sales technical support team. Most of the databases will work straight out of the box. I'm just using MySQL here because that's what Bugzilla is also using, so it's just nice and easy. So I've just created a read-only user there for my auditing reports later on. Now, this is another way that I can start and stop the CVS Suite server. Now, I've stopped the server, and before I restart it, I'm going to set a dependency on the server with the MySQL database so that the server doesn't start before the database has started, because that could create a problem with our auditing, because we wouldn't get the events being audited. What would happen would be that people would be denied connections to the server until the audit database would come up. It's just much easier just to not start the server until MySQL starts. We have to do this using the registry, and we just put depends on service MySQL in there, or if you're using Oracle, you put the Oracle service name in. Now, if we go into services, we will be able to see that that change has been picked up by looking on the dependencies. There we go. MySQL is now a dependency of the CVS Suite High Performance Service. And of course, I could use the Services Control Panel to restart the server service there, or I can use the command line to start the server service. So let's get into Visual Studio 2015. This is what you've all come here for. You want to know how to use CVS Suite with Visual Studio now that the server's all actually up and running. That's obviously all stuff that you only have to do once. So the first thing that we're going to need in Visual Studio is we're going to need a project so that we can import that into CVS and that we can then make changes. So first of all, we're going to connect up Visual Studio with CVS Suite. We just do that in the options there. Set the source control plugin to CVS Suite. And now we're going to find a project just using the samples here. I've speeded up this little part of the video because it's a bit boring just watching me looking for a project to open. I'll pick something reasonably simple. That all looks a bit complicated. I'm using a C++ project here. The plugin, of course, works with any project, everything from a database project to a web project or whatever. I'm also going to change the name of that project, store it in my documents folder. Because that's been downloaded, I have to install all that. Visual Studio will go through and do its magic and open it up. Now, notice this this little description page here. That's actually stored in your app data folder. It's not stored where you would expect it to be checked out, so I'm going to delete that a little bit later. Just so, yeah, let's just go through and remove that. Is it makes the project extra confusing trying to check it out into two separate folders. I built that. You can see that that build has been successful. Yep. So it all works. Get rid of that description, which I've already removed. Let's find some source code to change. Or to import, rather. Here we go, here's the source code. Now to import this into CVS Suite, it's very simple. Just go into the source control menu there and say add to source control. Because the wizard's been run, all those defaults are there. It's picked up a good name for that project, and I just press OK. starts off the import project. I then press OK, and now the rest of the project is imported. That will take a little time to run, just depending on the version of the server and the version of the client that you are using. We are working on some performance improvements for that for the next big release of CVS Suite. CVS Suite 2.8.02 will have some improvements to the performance on that initial import. If you're importing something particularly large, you might want to go make yourself a cup of coffee. That's all done. Here in our example, just about done. There we go. The last of that little twirly icon has gone away. And so I'm just going to close out of Visual Studio there. There might have been some changes to that solution. It's just before we get on with the rest of the demo, we want to make sure that that's all nicely cleared from memory. Now I can just open the recent project, of course. There it is. Just check in that changed solution that we saw at the end there that got modified as part of the import process. This is something that only kind of happens once. Once it's checked in, you need to reload it. There we go. The import process is complete. We can go into the CVS Suite properties here. I'm just going to enable defect tracking. You don't have to do that, but I'll show you the effect that that has on the software in a little moment. So we need something to work on, and what most organizations will have is some task management tool, either Jira or Bugzilla or something or another. CVS Suite will integrate with a lot of them, and if we don't already, just give our pre-sales technical support team a buzz. Now I'm just going to have a bit of a search for all bugs here using Bugzilla. There we go, that's the bug that I'm looking for. That's the task that's been assigned to me, bug 6950. So I review what the work was that was requested in that. Now as soon as I make that change, you might be able to see down there in that bottom window, CVS Suite and Visual Studio has recognized that that file has been changed and that there is a change now to check in. And when I'm finished, I'll be able to supply some information. So I'm going to just say that I've fixed that bug and got the status in there. Now, if I click on this little button, I get this little option to type in a bug number there, which is what enabling that defect tracking option did. It's actually much easier. I'm just hit cancel there. It's much easier just to put the text in the comment, and because we enabled that text to change set feature on the server, we don't have to worry about separate little menus and whatever. And of course, we can go and look at that file in my samples directory. There, one of those. There it is. And I can have a look at the revision graph. And then I can have a look at a side-by-side diff using WinMerge. There we go. I can see my changes nicely, clearly highlighted there. Now, I can also have a look at that change through the defect tracking system. Let's hop out of Visual Studio, back into Bugzilla. Now that I'll just refresh that, and you'll see the status has changed to resolved fixed because I put that in my comment, said that I've finished working on it. And there's my comment there, and there's the attachment. And I can click on the little diff button, and it again shows me a side-by-side diff with no connection to CVS Suite. It's just all in Bugzilla. Finally, I can also browse the repository using CVS Web and Internet Explorer here, and I can do the same. Lots of different ways to see the same information depending on what sort of access you have and what you need to see. So that's all fine and good if one person is working on a project, but that's not normally what happens. So somebody else now needs to be able to check out this project and also to be able to work on it. So I've got a second user set up on my machine here. Just use the switch user facility and hop into Visual Studio 2015. Again, we're using C++ here, but you could be using web development or database development, C#, Visual Basic. Now, if you're using an earlier version of Visual Studio, most of this works exactly the same way. Certainly all of the same features are available, all the way from Visual C version 6 right through to all the different versions of Visual Studio, right up to this most recent Visual Studio 2015. Before you have to do anything, the user has to select which source control plugin they're using. Once they've done that, that will be remembered. This person's also just going to enable that defect tracking option. Not really that critical, but if you want to use it. So they're going to browse the server to find the solution. And here it is. This is the one that I just imported as the other person. I'm going to say where I want it to go to, my documents folder, and just confirm that you do want that checked out. There it is. There's the solution file which you have to pick in the Visual Studio picker there. Visual Studio loads the project and does all of its various bits of magic. I think it's finished. Just have to open up the tree. Just going to build that so that you can see that it really has worked. You can see if there's that change that I'd already made as the other user. Now, I happen to know what my bug number is, so I'll just do a quick search for it, and here it is. Internet Explorer asking me a question, as it always does. So I'm going to reopen this bug as it's currently in the fixed state, and just say that, look, it's the message there is still wrong. We can have all sorts of rules on our integration with Bugzilla there, so that we could say that you're only allowed to check in changes against a bug if it's in a particular state, if it's opened. We haven't actually set that up on this example, but just wanted to make sure that it is in the right state. Now, we can see there that it's checked out. So therefore I'm allowed to make the change. Of course, this reserved mode way of working is optional, but a lot of people think that CVS Suite can't do it, so that's why I'm demonstrating. Most people know that CVS Suite can do concurrent editing, where lots of people can change the same file at the same time. Lots of people don't realize it can also do reserved mode if that option is switched on. So this is just what I'm going to demonstrate here. Now, Visual Studio doesn't make it terribly obvious what's going on, but it does work. We're going to try and improve this in a more recent version of the software, but for now, just show you what it looks like. I've made a change there just in those comments, and there was no error message to say that it didn't work, but equally we can see that the file hasn't been checked out. So that's what we see as the fact that no, we haven't been allowed to make that change. We can confirm that by having a look at the sample and using the special command here, editors, and it will show that no, there are no editors. Or rather, there is one editor, but it's not me. You can see there that that file is not changed. So even though that we're seeing a change in here, we're not able to get that change into the system because it's already been reserved by the other guy that's working on it in the other session. Now that might be behavior that you do want or you don't want, but the option is there. That's how people would be used to using Visual SourceSafe. If I try and get really insistent here, I will eventually get this error message saying that the item is locked. I don't know why we don't get that error message at other times. Visual Studio API there is a little bit complicated, and we can see that the change hasn't been saved. And it really won't let me make that change. So I can't build the project, I can't really do very much there at all. So I'm just going to discard that. That's the only option that I'm left with until that other person releases the project. So switch back. I can now make this change. Again, set the status to fixed and specify the bug number there. If you don't like the word bug, you can change it, of course, in the server control panel to recognize some different sort of text, maybe you prefer job or issue or something like that. Just refresh Bugzilla. We'll see that we now have 2 attachments. And there's my latest change. Again, it's been set back into the fixed state. So that's a very Visual Studio oriented process, but there are other ways to also check out the project. So let's switch to another user here. Fire up Visual Studio again. I've deliberately used a very straight out of the box type configuration so that you don't think that I'm cheating in any way. I'm just doing 2 things at once here. I'm opening up Visual Studio, getting it all configured with the source control plugin set to CVS Suite, and I'm also starting up CVS Suite Studio there in the background. Here we go. So we can use CVS Suite Studio to drag that project to the Documents folder. So I just drag it from the left to the right there, and there we go. It's checked out. Sometimes that initial checkout of the project can take a little while in Visual Studio, so it might be a lot quicker for you to do that using the CVS Suite Studio. Once, of course, the project is checked out, just need to find, there it is, I've dragged it to the Documents folder. I can open it in Visual Studio and make changes in exactly the same way. So even though I didn't check it out using Visual Studio, as soon as I go into the code there and make a change, Visual Studio will just check that out. So if I wanted to change that same bit of code, but I might change the next button instead, because that code's had a lot of work already. Let's do the next button. As soon as I make a change there it is. It's automatically checked out and appears in the Visual Studio interface. I can build that. Just proving here that the whole Visual Studio process does work. You can check out code, build it, change it, update your job tracking, defect tracking system, move on to the next change. Now, because I didn't set bug 6950 to require a certain status, even though it's already marked as fixed, I can still check in a change against it. Done. You'll find checking in individual changes with the Visual Studio integration is always very quick, just sometimes that initial import and sometimes that checkout can take a little bit longer. So I just wanted to show you a couple of other techniques to use there, such as using CVS Suite Studio. Finally, I've written a little Excel spreadsheet here with a query against the MySQL database. There it is. So I just need to go into the pivot table ribbon there and hit refresh, and you can see there are the stats. Fred made a change, Mary made a change, Scott made a whole bunch of changes. So thank you very much for your attention to the demo. That's Visual Studio and CVS Suite working together with Bugzilla, auditing, change sets, showing how to set everything up from scratch. Thank you.